We're very lucky to have our opening speaker. Peter Maves has been with us, Todd and I, for all of our conferences. He lives in Boulder, Colorado, and he's given very generously of his time and flew in. And as you all, some of you know, Denver was hit with one of the biggest snowstorms in the last 15 years, and he managed to get out. He said he would introduce himself, so his name is Peter Maves. Thank you, Peter.
Listen, many thanks to Todd Ensign and Eric and all the gang with Citizen Soldier for doing this. Thanks to everybody locally that's been supportive. Thanks to everybody who spoke this morning. Very, very powerful. And this is an important project. I'm a clinical psychologist in Boulder, Colorado. You may have heard about a small snowstorm yesterday in Colorado. We had the kind of 20-year storm, and once I got out of my home, which is in Lyons, Colorado, which is up by Rocky Mountain National Park, there was about 1.5 or 2 feet of snow, so I dug my way out, and once I got on the roads, which were horrible, I got into the airport, which DIA is standard operating with this kind of thing. It was clear, it was great, all of that. So I want to take 20 minutes to talk about some information I always get put on right after lunch so that everybody can nod off on relatively difficult information. What I'd like to do is talk about some standard definitions very quickly, and then I'd like to talk about some issues related to trauma, complex trauma, post-traumatic stress, traumatic brain injury, and how it really looks and appears. So here comes our first test. I'm going to run through these. Anybody who wants a copy of my PowerPoint, just give me your email, I'll send them to you. Acute stress disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder are essentially the same thing. It's just a time kind of difference. Acute stress disorder happens right away. Post-traumatic stress disorder carries on. So, not too much of a distinction. Here's the actual, this is the same kind of set of criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. As we heard this morning, and as I totally agree with, there's a much broader spectrum. It's not just being around serious injury and death. It's about the context of being in traumatic situations. It's what happens to someone next to you. It's what you feel. It's the environment. So I really want to talk about complex trauma and post-traumatic stress in terms of conditions, much more than these kinds of definitions. Again, we've heard this morning some very, very powerful first-hand accounts of these kinds of issues. Numbing, derealization, depersonalization. Again, I'm sure that you've seen all of this, and that's not the important thing. Again, if you want any of this information, I'll be glad to give it to you. Here's what I want to talk about. There's a constellation that happens when we're confronted with trauma, when we're in traumatic situations. The first and foremost, and again we heard this morning, there is a back and forth between a place of hyperarousal, intrusive information. We heard about associations, things that have come up, talked about sleep disturbance. This is information that can't be withheld. It's just there. It comes up, it's associative, flashbacks, and so forth. One of the things about flashbacks that's so frightening is that flashbacks come up without any context. Usually we think in terms of beginning, middle, and end. What happens with flashbacks is that we get the most powerful piece of information without any context. It just comes up, and it comes up in the supermarket, or it comes up when you're with your family or with your friends, and you have no sense that it's going to happen. So I want to move down to the end here, loss of a sense of mastery and impact, and I would add loss of a sense of mastery and control. Most of the individuals that I see tell me, you know, there was a time when, boy, I could do anything. I could track, I could think about things clearly, and now I can't do any of that. And I don't know when something's going to happen. I don't know when this information is going to come up. So the issue is a loss of mastery and control, and the other thing that I think is critically important is that these are, and we've heard this, started to hear this term, these are invisible conditions. So post-traumatic stress, you know, well, how do you define that? If you have a broken leg, yes. Traumatic brain injury, how do you know that? You don't know in looking at someone that they're dealing with the exhaustion of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. So, the other side here is numbing and constriction. The other problem is that the information isn't present, it's just not there, but you don't feel good. You know, gee, I can't seem to function, and I don't know why. I have these significant dates that seem to come up, and I don't know why. And so there's this whole other presentation that I get where people, my clients and patients come to me and say, you know, doc, I just don't feel right, but I don't know why. I don't know why. And the why is that we go back and forth between this incredible amount of hyperarousal and this incredible amount of constriction. Now, I work in terms of diagnosis and trying to figure out. And many people come to me and say, well, I've been diagnosed as having bipolar disorder or manic depressive. Well, no. There's hyperarousal and there's constriction. Not to say that it doesn't exist, but a lot of times there's a tremendous amount of misdiagnosis, and it's used in the wrong way. It's sad to see, but it happens. So, helplessness and loss of control, extreme feelings of vulnerability. So what happens if that most people I see, I've been extremely competent. They've been in a lot of positions. They've been in the military. They've been in a lot of command positions, and all of a sudden, they can't do anything. They're frozen in a sense of I don't know whether what I should do, which way I should go. Inability to make decisions. Compulsive repetitions. I always say that if you come into my office, and my office is set up so that you kind of come into my working area first and then you go into the therapy room. And if my desk is really all straightened up and orderly, then I'm in serious trouble because I'm trying to exert external control over internal chaos. So these ideas of compulsive repetition say, well, I give myself the illusion that I'm not vulnerable. I'll give myself the illusion that I'm not feeling helpless and out of control. And then a broad spectrum of themes of denial. This really didn't happen, I shouldn't be feeling this way, and so forth and so on. So this is what comes from post-traumatic exposure to complex trauma, to conditions, not just a few situations, but a whole broad situation. I'm going to run through this, but I think that this is pretty important because I don't think it gets talked about a lot. My task, among my tasks as a therapist and as a psychologist working with trauma and military trauma, is to change traumatic memory into something else. Now, why? Because traumatic memory is always there. It's always there's an association. You hear a sound, you smell something, you think about something, there's a date, there's an anniversary date, there's something that happens, and it's like it never went away. It's always there. So all of these kinds of things, sense of timelessness, no social function evoked by triggers and so forth, is really saying that that content is still very much there. My task is to try to move, one of my tasks is to try to move traumatic memory into narrative memory, to say, look, I remember what happened, I know how I felt, I still have that feeling, and I know that there's the present, I know that there's support, I know that I have my family, I know that I have my children. It's to anchor. It's not the feelings are going to be there. It's how we start to put it into context. So a key down here at the bottom is modulated affect. By that I mean that we're in charge of it. It's an integrated, associated. Two other quick concepts, the idea of implicit versus explicit. Explicit is knowing how to fix the lawnmower, knowing how to turn on the light, knowing how to work with a computer, which I don't have, but those kinds of things are explicit. The problem is that trauma content is in the implicit. So the implicit is there enough light here? Is it warm or cold? Cold, obviously. It's the context. And the problem is that the trauma content is stored in the implicit. So there's always an association. There's always a trigger. There's always something. So part of my task is to start to say, what are those triggers? Be aware of them. Start to move into a different level of observation and awareness. Now then, bear with me on this. This gets a little thorny, but there are some things that happen with exposure to trauma. One of them is that we have a natural opiate-like substance. This is the research of Bessel van der Kolk at Harvard that says that the longer you're immersed in trauma, the calmer you become. So what happens as someone who works with trauma, that I help someone move out of that trauma place? How do they feel? Horrible. At the beginning, horrible. They don't feel better. We don't feel better. We feel worse. And especially in the kind of trauma that we're talking about here, intense, consistent, over and over trauma, it's like having, it's a withdrawal process. So it becomes really important. Now, I want to talk about several systems here that operate. We have what we call a hot system, which is our emotional system, the amygdala, and that we take in information at a hot place. I mean, it's an emotional place. And the balance of that is our hippocampal system. So the amygdala goes, something happens, it goes, oh my God, I don't know what to do. And the hippocampal system comes along and says, look, don't worry about it. Take it a day at a time. We'll work on this. The dilemma here is that exposure and involvement in trauma decreases hippocampal volume. So what does that mean? It means that, so again, bear with me, if we have a graph like this, we have intensity of trauma over here, and we have length of time over here, okay? You with me on that? So, as we go along on this graph with intensity and length of time, the function of the hippocampal system, it moderates the information, the hot system in the brain, the amygdala system. And it goes along and goes along and goes along and goes along. But what happens is that as the intensity of trauma increases over a length of time, what happens is that the hippocampal drops off. We have research, Bremer, that I just put up, shows that long-term immersion to trauma or quick immersion to very powerful trauma, all of a sudden the hippocampal volume drops off. So what happens at that point to the amygdala and the information? It skyrockets. There's no modulation. Now, the good news is that if I can get a hold of somebody and I can start to work with the trauma, that hippocampal volume comes back so that all of a sudden the regulating system. But the problem is that that information that happens after the modulation stops, that information is encoded at a very, very, very high, frightening level inside us. So it takes a little time to work that through. But all of the research shows, and my personal experience shows, that we do get that modulating function back. And yet we have to be in treatment to do it. Or somehow. It doesn't have to be treatment, it just has to happen. Now, I want to quickly talk about something that doesn't get a lot of mention, and that's the whole idea of dissociation. You've done it today, you've done it with me so far. You've thought about something else, you've left, you've thought about lunch, you've thought about what you have to do after this conference. Normal kind of process. What happens, though, is that we really take care of ourselves very well. And so, under extreme conditions, we just sort of disappear. We just sort of, we're not there. And we dissociate away. So that leads to another layer of dilemma. So someone comes with post-traumatic kinds of things, with information that's encoded, that's very hot, with numbing and constriction and intrusive information, themes of denial, all of this, loss of mastery and control. Nobody acknowledges it because you can't see it. Then you add on the fact that every once in a while you sort of disappear. So it'd be like me all of a sudden showing up here and going, wow, what am I doing here? I had a client tell me that she, she was back in school and she just found herself sort of in class. And I said, well, how'd you get there? She said, oh, well, I have no idea. I don't know how I got there, but I guess I'm doing okay because I'm getting good grades. No idea of the time that she spent. So we dissociate. One more quick thing here. We're talking about invisible traumatic brain injury. This is the really the invisible wound that we see, and it is powerful. When we start to add post-traumatic stress, when we start to add this whole loss of mastery and control, when we add the possibility of dissociative kinds of issues, when we add the issues of not being able to have such information encoded so hot, and then we throw in traumatic brain injury where there's the inability to track the simplest things. Okay, I'm going to go to the store, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that. Nope. No. No. It's absolutely exhausting. What happens is that we filter. We have a perceptual filter. So there's noise, there's this, there's that, there's stuff going on. All that automatically gets filtered out until we run into some kind of brain injury. And then all of that comes back. So, tracking problems, disorientation, severe headaches, sleep disturbance, depression, mood swings, memory loss. So, we build up this sense of a loss of mastery and control. I used to be this person, and now I'm not. One of the things that's so critical is with the work that I do with traumatic brain injury, I have to be acutely aware of the surroundings. I would never see someone in this kind of situation. Microphone, bright lights, light coming in from the window, sounds, everything like that. Never do that. I can't do that. I take the clocks out of my office. I close the blinds. I turn off everything. I sit closer with someone. I do all kinds of things to change the amount of stress coming in. So, again, the problem with traumatic brain injury is that it's absolutely exhausting and debilitating, both in terms of physiological and psychological. So, what are we left with? What we're left with is that this is the end of my side of this, but these are very, very, very powerful conditions. And one of the things that I want to say is that they are all, we can work with all of them. And it's a matter of specialized techniques. It's a matter of understanding the variety of conditions and presentations, but we do get better from this. I mean, this is what I do for a living here, and I assure you that there are many, many things happening right now. There are many new treatment techniques, and when Eric said, what was your word? I said hopeful. So thanks very much. I really greatly appreciate it.
First off, let's do this. I don't need a microphone to do this. All right, let's just stand up for a minute, everybody. I put your arms in the air and just shake it out, shake it out, shake it out, shake it out. Then shake your booty, shake your booty, shake your booty, shake your booty. Shake your booty, shake your booty. Now what I want you to do, all right, is to give a good laugh. Four. Oh, that's not good enough. Outlaugh the next person. You're ready. You ready? All right. Everybody awake? I'll put you to sleep. All right, now, I don't usually stand in one place, but I bet this gentleman would really like it if I did. First off, before we go any further, I do want to recognize Joseph and Todd and Eric. Would you please stand up one more time, all three of you guys, because they did a wonderful job putting this together. It took a lot of effort. Thank you very, very much. My pleasure to be here. I'm going to be talking to you today about treating suicidality. That's my specialty. That's what I've done for decades. And first off, I'm going to tell you why you should listen to me, because most people, yeah, they don't care. Listen to me. I got to tell you first what I am and who I am. I treat suicidality because I know the subject inside and out. I know it personally and professionally. At 8 years old, I became suicidal. I'm not going to go into any of the history behind that, but the point for you needing to know is that for the next 24 years after my 8th year, I continued to fight for my life every day of my life. I did not understand why I had to do this, but I somehow got the idea that everyone fought for their life like that every day of their life. For 24 years, folks, 24 very long traumatic years. At 32, I was delivered from my active suicidality. But I will tell you this, as I will explain later on, and I will try to talk as fast as I can. I will speed up the cadence because, Dorothy will be there going, you got 5 minutes, all right, so I'll be ready for you. So follow me quickly. I may be talking like a radio operator here. All right, giving you coordinates. But the important thing for you to get is that after I was delivered from my active suicidality, after many suicide attempts that I didn't understand, and it's important for you to know also that during that 24 years, I only told my parents that I was suicidal. My parents told me that I needed to suck it up and drive on. They were in the military, but they used their civilian words for that. And so that's what I did. I never told anyone because I knew from what I'd been told, nobody wanted to hear that stuff. It made people feel uncomfortable. They didn't know what to do. So I never told anyone. Well, became evident to my closest friends that there was something wrong, especially after the 3 psychiatric hospitalizations after 3 major attempts. So I'm going to talk to you about how I treat suicidality, but how I learned about suicidality and how it forms in people's minds. The important thing to understand, and one thing Greg said this morning was, you remember that a lot of military people, we've discovered that they have never been deployed? I will tell you, most of the suicides have never been deployed in the military, especially in the National Guard. So what's interesting about that is then, what else is going on in people's lives? I'm going to tell you some pretty shocking things, and I'm going to spare you a lot of the data simply because I don't have time to give you all the statistics. So what I'm going to tell you is simply this, that there is a lot more suicidal ideation out there than you could possibly ever imagine. And people don't tell you about it because they don't want to burden you. And because maybe they've told someone else and that person had told them to just suck it up and drive on. So I'm going to teach you later on how to help people who are suicidal and not to be afraid of suicidality. So what is suicidality itself? Suicidality, it comprises thoughts of suicide, attempts of suicide, and death by suicide. And a Compassionate Friends Network uses the words death by suicide instead of committing suicide because it sort of destigmatizes it. One of our biggest problems in dealing with suicidality and mental health problems is the stigma within the society against it. All right, so that is what suicidality is. It's a fairly recent term. It's only been since 2006 since we've used that big, long term, but it encompasses everything about suicide. So let's talk about how it develops. I found some commonalities in the decades that I have treated suicidality. By the way, you can find this on my website, which is jsp3.org. You cannot Google it. It will not come up on Google. They won't pay for optimization. Okay, that's neither there nor there. But if you put the URL, www.jsp3.org, it will come up. And you'll find out all this information that I'm giving you today, plus oodles more. But anyway, So let's get back to what causes suicidality. The commonalities I found are this. An individual comes on very early in their life and they get the idea that suicide is a viable option. It's an acceptable option to dealing with problems. When I was a youngster, one of my girlfriend's fathers killed himself. He killed himself, and besides saying nothing, what they did say was, he's in a better place. Oh, really? According to who? But that was the word. And I've learned that my patients tell me that most of the time when they're early on in their lives and people don't talk about suicide, someone suicides and they don't talk about it at all. What in our society, how do we interpret not talking about something? It's usually you either agree with it or you don't care. So if you don't talk about suicide to your youngsters, your kids, your compatriots, that's the message that our society sends. I don't care, or usually I don't know what to do about it. So the very first thing that happens is that they develop a method of accepting suicide as an acceptable option. Are you with me so far? Okay, so that goes sort of subterranean. That goes subconscious, and they just hold on to that. Then there comes a time in their life when they get boxed into a corner with untenable psychological problems, physical problems, financial problems, sociological problems, whatever problems they have, and they can't figure a way out. Immediately think, well, I know somebody who's in a better place, and this is what they did. They suicided. And suddenly, that feeling of relief from that problem floods their brain with endorphins, that pain-relieving neurosubstance that we have in all of our bodies. That's what you felt a minute ago when you were laughing. Right? Okay, so now you've got these endorphins in your head, and every time you think about being free, the suicide and the freedom and the endorphins get matched in your brain. And a neural pathway begins to develop in your brain, saying, this is a viable option. So, the question, I often talk about neural pathways in the brain because it's easier to say, do you know the Oregon Trail and how they went through all of those ruts? Have you seen the ruts, the trail ruts? That's where the wagon wheels, yeah, see, David's seen, yeah, so you can see where the wagon wheels over years and years and years have made ruts right straight through the bedrock. You can stand in them. It's rock. That's a neural pathway in your brain, and that's how permanent it is. And once you get in that rut, you can't get out of it. And it's driven by endorphins. Now let's talk about what it feels like to feel the power of hope. Okay, every one of you, I bet, has woke up on one morning and said, I don't feel so good. Maybe I should call the doctor. And then you say, oh no, I'm not going to call the doctor. I got to get to work. I got too much work to do. I'm not going to call the doctor. And then you feel worse. And you say, oh my goodness, maybe I should call the doctor. And you go back and forth. And then you finally decide to call the doctor. And you call the doctor, and immediately you feel better. And you think, why did I call the doctor? And then all of a sudden you start feeling worse again. That immediate feeling of relief is the endorphins of hope. The hope that the doctor will relieve your pain. It is the same endorphins that you feel from the relief of removing yourself from a problem that seems untenable or unsolvable. So you see, it builds up a hope pathway in your brain. But you don't know that at the time. You have no idea what's going on in your brain. If you did, you wouldn't do it. But guess what? You don't know it, so you kind of go there because it makes you feel better. Originally, I never thought about killing myself. I just thought about being out of the problem, taking myself out of the problem. So it began to be sort of an addictive thought pattern where I continued on, and every time I got backed into a corner, immediately the thought came up, gee, I'd like to be out of here. How can I get out of here? And then all of a sudden, just thinking about being away wasn't enough to bring on enough endorphins. So I began further down the road, kind of addictive thinking, well, now I need to move towards getting the job done. And that brought endorphins. So you see how it progresses over time, not necessarily overnight. And individuals who you hear just quote, quote, up and shoot themselves, guess what? They don't just up and shoot themselves. Generally, statistics show that there's 6 attempts and many practice sessions before that. So whether you hear about it or not is another question, isn't it? You usually hear much later. Okay, so are you with me now on the psychobiology of this and how it's going? Okay, so then basically we have the stigma of our society saying, don't tell, because if you do tell, someone will slap you in the hospital. I have a patient, she came to see me and she said, I'm suicidal, but I don't want you to know I'm suicidal because I know you're going to put me in the hospital. I said, guess what? I'm not going to put you in the hospital, but I will monitor you, and you will be honest with me, and when it's time, and if I think that this is where you need to go to get safe, that's fine. When I was in the hospitals, when I was in the psych wards, I was there for like 6 to 8 weeks. Now you're there for 72 hours. 72 hours. Do you think you get much? No, you don't. You get sort of warehoused for a little while. And when is the most dangerous time for a suicidal person? Anybody know? While you're in the hospital or 1 week after you leave the hospital. So why did I tell my patient I wouldn't put her in the hospital? Because she's safer outside the hospital. Because what I helped her do was form the Jensen Suicide Prevention Peer Protocol. I invited her friends in, and we taught them about the psychobiology of suicide, not to be afraid of it, that it was a coping mechanism. That is all it is, a coping mechanism. That individuals who think about suicide, they don't want to be dead, they want to be free. They want to be free of the problem that is harassing them. That's it. So if you start problem solving, you can solve suicide and suicidality. You can do it. That's what the Jensen Peer Protocol is all about, is forming a group of people who make certain agreements based on honesty, absolute honesty. You've got to have honesty within this group. And everyone's got to have the education, everybody's got to be on board with it. Everybody makes reciprocal agreements. Guess what? Do you think you should burden a suicidal person with your problems? Yes! Absolutely. How many people would think, no, you shouldn't do that? Yeah. How many people think, no, you shouldn't bother the people who are suicidal and ask them to do things for you? Right. Guess what? The most powerful thing about a peer protocol is reciprocity. One of my patients says to me, you're not going to believe this, but my friend called me and asked me to help his son work out a math problem. And he said, it took me out of my suicidal depression for 30 minutes, and I felt so good afterwards. Who would think to call a noticeably suicidal person? This fellow was in a deep suicidal depression. And I told his group, I told his peer protocol group, call him and ask him for favors. Drag him out of the house, call him on his stuff. So, as simple as that, huh? So that's how we learn to understand suicidality. That's how we learn not to be afraid of it. That's how we learn to help people, by being open and understanding and compassionate about it. That it's a coping mechanism. So now let's ask this question. Does it go away? Nope. It gets extinguished a bit, but it doesn't go away forever. This is what happens. And here's a good example of me, all right? Because how can a person who was suicidal for 24 years, not have a pretty severe, deeply rutted neural pathway, right? All right, so last summer I'm driving along. I'm down I-5. I'm feeling very, very upset and very, very put upon and all those other negative emotions. And immediately comes to my head suicide. What? I'm a perfectly happy person. I'm happily married. I've got a beautiful cat. I've got a beautiful house. What is my problem? So I pulled over to the side of the road. I called one of my JSP3 people, and she said, "What the heck is going on with you?" And I said, "Well, let's figure it out." She said, "Okay, walk me back from here. What is going on?" She's not a psychotherapist. She's a CPA. She's not into feelings. She's into numbers. But she knows what to do because I taught her what to do. She knows immediately, Randy, whenever you have those feelings, that means you've got problems that you have not identified, and you need to find out what they are, and you need to solve them immediately. So we walked all the way through it. I said, oh, I get it. I know exactly what I have to do. The next day I took care of it, no problem. But you see, I wasn't afraid of the suicidality anymore because I knew what it meant. It meant I have a problem I have not identified that I need to solve ASAP. Is it making sense to you guys? Are you not afraid of suicidality anymore? Are you going to reach out to people who might have those warning signs that isolating, having difficulty with problems, kind of becoming a little withdrawn, maybe making goodbye statements, maybe giving their stuff away, giving all of those signs that you see on all of those websites? Those signs are great, but if you don't reach out to that person and with compassion and tell them what you have just learned, and tell them they can go to my website and they can download all this information. You can download a booklet that tells you how to form a peer support group, what to do, what to say. You know what? You are now empowered. Every single one of you in this room now has all the information you need. Got it? You are terrific. You guys, you got the deer in the headlights look. That's all right. That's okay. I'm used to it, believe me. I'm used to it. So I'm available to each and every one of you. All you have to do is call me up. All you have to do is email me and I'll respond to you. Because my mission in life is that those 24 years of pain and agony do not go for naught. All right. Thank you.